So the question now is, what lies ahead for Saif? Will it be the same kind of summary justice that was meted out to his father? Will it be a trial, fair or otherwise, in Libya? Or will it be a spell in the dock at the International Criminal Court in The Hague? We'll talk a lot more about this morning. First, let's speak to Nabila Ramdani, who's a journalist who's interviewed Saif al-Islam. Good morning, Nabila.
Good morning.
This must have meant a lot to you when you heard that he'd been captured.
Well, absolutely. This is a young man who I've met on a number of occasions in different places in his, home city of Tripoli, but also in Paris and more recently in London. I've interviewed him many times. And, when you meet somebody in the flesh and you've interviewed them many times, it means, something very different when, they become part and parcel of the bigger history and of not only a particular country, which is Libya, but Saif al-Islam Gaddafi means a great deal to the international community as well.
Yeah, we were saying there as well, there was a time when he was very much seen as the future of Libya, such a contrast to what we saw yesterday.
Most definitely, and right up until the start of the rebellion, he was singing a very different tune to his father. He was very much at the forefront of the détente process with the West. He's the one who was the go-between, effectively, between his father's pariah regime and Western figures, prominent British public figures, including Tony Blair, but also royalty like Prince Andrew. He studied in London at the London School of Economics, and he was very much groomed not only by his father, but dare I say, by the West to take over from his father, to the point that when an assassination plot happened against his life in 2004, organized by the Qatari Islamists, both the French intelligence and indeed the MI6 worked hand in hand to protect him on UK soil because they saw him as the next ruler of Libya.
At this stage, it looks increasingly like there will be a trial, but the question is whether that trial will happen in Libya or in The Hague.
Absolutely, and I think there's a huge appetite for the International Criminal Court to try Gaddafi, a high-profile character like him, at The Hague, but also within Libya, the appetite is even bigger to try the son of a dictator who was tipped as the next heir in Libya at home and to do justice domestically. Now, there are several difficulties to achieve that. First of all, Saif Gaddafi is still very much, captured by the Zintan Brigade, which is refusing so far to handing him over to the National Transitional Council in Libya. So we're seeing again how the NTC has difficulty in establishing overall authority in the country. But also, more practically, Libya doesn't have a justice system, and it has to start from scratch. And, the question is, how far can we trust a justice system that is, a fledgling one?
What do you think would be the best solution here for the future of Libya, establishing that new future?
I think, of course, Saif Gaddafi would have greater chances not to be executed if he were to be tried at The Hague. We've heard yesterday statements made by NTC officials, but also by highly educated people in Libya, including prominent academics, saying literally, Saif Gaddafi will get what he deserves, that is the death penalty. Now, this sounded rather ominous and indeed more like a predetermined trial, because all these people were not putting allegations against Saif Gaddafi, who, has to be said, hasn't been charged yet. But their comments sounded very much like, statements of what he is to expect. But of course, it is up to a court of law to establish whether these allegations are true.
And also, Nabila, you've written an article in this morning's Observer on a topic we were talking about on Weekend Breakfast yesterday morning, actually, abuse on Twitter, and it's something that you've been experiencing.
Absolutely. As a journalist and commentator, I obviously, put my views and opinions out, and I do not expect people to agree with me all the time, far from it. And I can take criticism. I'm not a humorless person, But the problem is that, and it is a growing problem, that I think people feel comfortable sending criminal messages to people on the web, thinking that this is perfectly permissible, whereas of course in real life it is very much a criminal offence. Now, I had difficulty in dealing with the police when I reported the crime against me, and I pretty much, dealt with a detective sergeant who told me that it wasn't a crime, in his opinion, to be called, excuse my language, but a prostitute on the internet, and that he wasn't convinced that it was worth pursuing. Now, if you, of course, there have been several cases involving footballers who have been the victims of several Twitter abuses on the internet, and the police was swift in investigating those cases and indeed arresting people in connection with those crimes who are now facing prosecution. So my point was that we are very much equipped with the legislation and the technology to arrest web offenders, and there shouldn't be, a two-tier system, one for the rich and famous, and another one for ordinary citizens like me.
Nabila, thank you for talking to us this morning. Nabila Ramdani, there, journalist who's interviewed Saif al-Islam in the past. 12 minutes past 6.